Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am your moderator, Amanda McLean, the Farm Management Specialist here at North Dakota Farmers Union. And today we will be covering the Farm Bill update with expert Mike Strands from the National Farmers Union. A few housekeeping tip ideas before we get started. Everyone is on mute, but if at any time you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the chat and Mike will answer any of those questions at the end of this presentation. Also, this webinar is recorded, so you can find it by searching YouTube, going to the YouTube channel and searching North Dakota Farmers Union. You will also find our previous webinars on there. We ask that you please take the exit survey after this webinar as it helps to continue to improve these webinars with content. With that, I would like to introduce today's guest speaker, Mike Strands. He is the VP of President of Advocacy for the National Farmers Union, where he leads lobbying and grassroots outreaches efforts for the organization. Strands previously worked on the House Agricultural Committee Democrat staff, most recently as a subcommittee staff director for General Farm Commodities and Risk Management, where he helped navigate the 2018 Farm Bill. Before going to Capitol Hill, Strand spent his first 5 years in Washington as a government relations representative for National Farmers Union. Prior to that, he worked for the Wisconsin Farmers Union as a state lobbyist. Strands earned a bachelor's degree in agricultural journalism from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and grew up on a hobby farm in Wisconsin. He lives in Northeast Washington, D.C. with his wife, Laura, and sons, Pete and Max. Thank you, Mike, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks everybody for joining in today. Glad to talk with North Dakota Farmers Union and friends about the Farm Bill situation. And really, there's a few different things to talk about when we consider the Farm Bill. I'll start off just with some Farm Bill basics about what's in the Farm Bill and a little bit on the history of the Farm Bill very quickly. Talk about who is involved in the Farm Bill process, what has happened so far in the Farm Bill process this go around, what we think ought to happen with the Farm Bill, and finally, what's likely or possible to happen with the Farm Bill. But of course, when we're talking about farm policy and the big issues for advocacy for an organization like Farmers Union, the Farm Bill is like the Olympics and the Super Bowl all wrapped into one because it only happens every so often and it's your opportunity to make some big changes. Farmers Union members and farmers and ranchers across the country have spent several years talking about what needs to be in this next farm bill. The last one, of course, was passed back in 2018. So we've got an opportunity here in 2025 to make a difference. There's already been some action on that, and I'll get into that a little bit here too. But also underscoring all of this is the general state of the farm economy right now. And I don't have to tell many people here about how the warning lights are going off and the alarm bells are ringing when it comes to the farm economy. Uh, Lots of headlines in the last several weeks, but those are just building upon months and really years of some bad indicators here. One particularly alarming statistic is that farm bankruptcies went up by almost doubled in the first quarter of 2025 as compared to the first quarter of 2024. That's not a good sign. Similarly, more and more farmers are falling behind on farm loans, whether that's for land or for lines of credit for production. And you can see how those sorts of uh, issues are continuing to build and are ticking back up. You back in 2017, 2018, 2019, that was a particularly rough stretch for many farmers and ranchers, and we're starting to bump back up there again too, according to the Kansas City Fed. And then production costs are up 50% overall for agriculture in the last decade. And as I think a lot of us know, that when production costs go up, they don't seem to come down much, or if they do, it takes a long time. So we're still in an era of high production costs. At the same time, we're in lower commodity prices right now. And since 2022, corn prices are down 50%, soybean prices are down 40%. Lots of other bad numbers out there in other commodities. We do know that there's been some relatively high prices for cattle, and the beef market is like one shining light right now, but there's some other issues there on the production cycles and the size of the herd that probably will have some long-term effects that'll hurt a lot of farmers and ranchers too. So between cattle prices being high and government payments over the last several years being relatively, actually very high, that's propped up a lot of the farm economy. And if those go away or we don't consider them, the rest of the farm economy, particularly in commodities and row crops, is not in a good spot at all. So that's underlying all this discussion about the Farm Bill in fall of 2025, or I guess almost fall of 2025. But as we get into the Farm Bill some more, I do want to talk about what is typically in a Farm Bill. So the last time we passed this major piece of omnibus farm legislation was in 2018. And the 2018 Farm Bill was a bit of an outlier in that it only took a year to do. But what was in the Farm Bill, these are usually the titles that are included in a full, complete Farm Bill coalition. I'll spend a lot of time today talking about Titles 1, commodities, and Title 11, crop insurance. Those make up the farm safety net, and those are kind of underpinning much of the farm economy. But there's other big portions of the Farm Bill that bring in a lot of support from other organizations and from constituents, and certainly from members of Congress, but also have a big impact on rural America. And that's on conservation, Title II. Title IV, nutrition is a big one. Title VI, rural development, we'll talk about a little bit today. And all these different parts of the Farm Bill bring in more support traditionally. They bring in more stakeholders. And when you build a bigger and stronger Farm Bill coalition, you're going to have an easier time getting that Farm Bill across the floor. Not to say that it's ever easy to get a Farm Bill done, but when you have more support, it's easier to pass bills. But again, to think about what is typically in a Farm Bill, we have the Farm Safety Net. So that's ARC and PLC. Those are dictated by the Agriculture Risk Coverage Program and the Price Loss Coverage Program. Those are Farm Bill programs. Conservation programs like the Conservation Reserve Program in the Farm Bill. Nutrition programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, traditionally in the Farm Bill. Agricultural research uh, efforts, rural development initiatives, promoting trade, forestry language, for instance, and other sorts of priorities that are identified through report language, all part of the Farm Bill. There's also a few important agricultural policies that are not part of the Farm Bill that I want to highlight too, like food safety issues, not typically a Farm Bill thing. The school lunch program, not in the Farm Bill. That's a jurisdictional issue based on how the Senate and the House Agriculture Committees divvy up their work. School lunch, not part of it. Trade promotion is part of the Farm Bill, but trade agreements historically not part of the Farm Bill. So even as trade has been a huge issue and continues to be a huge issue for farmers across the country, especially when we're in a trade environment where agriculture is running a deficit, a $47 billion trade deficit, trade agreements are not part of the Farm Bill and haven't been part of the conversation this time. You've probably heard Farmers Union over the last few years talk about a competition title being part of a Farm Bill. Historically, it hasn't been. We're asking for it to be, but it's not been there in the past. It might end up in a miscellaneous title, or it could still find its way in there. And funding for staff, like USDA staff, is not really dictated by the Farm Bill. There might be some initiatives to plus up funding here or there for certain agencies, but usually that is not directly tied to staffing. Staffing levels and the dollars allocated for that go through the appropriations process, which is separate, different, related, but not part of the Farm Bill. And as I said before, the 2018 Farm Bill was a bit of a unicorn in that it got done in a single calendar year. The 2018 bill started being debated and marked up and amended and adopted by the agriculture committees in early 2018. And by December, or just before Christmas 2018, it was signed into law by President Trump. But typically, farm bills are adopted for 5 years at a time, but often are extended for a year or more before the next bill passes. And as we look back through the farm bills, really that have been around since 1933, there's a few landmark ones out there kind of going back in time. The 1996 Farm Bill was a pretty dramatic change from previous farm bills, freedom to farm, as it was known, and that became a real problem as many of the supports in the farm safety net went away and needed to be addressed through emergency legislation following the 96 bill, and then the 2002 Farm Bill put a bunch more money back into farm safety net programs. That was a real landmark uh, situation there. The 1985 Farm Bill really is the spot where the Farm Bill Coalition, as we currently or have a long time known it, as we know it, came around in 1985, which was, of course, in the depths of the farm crisis of the 80s. And that's where a lot of farm and nutrition efforts all really coalesced around working together to make sure that farmers and ranchers are helped through the Farm Bill, but also hungry people are helped through the Farm Bill. And that really showed the big, broad coalition that's worked together for the last 40 years or so, got pulled together in 1985. And later on, you might hear me talk about permanent law. All these farm bills that are built upon uh, the framework put forth in the 1938 to 1949 farm bills. We call it permanent law. And as a way to make sure that Congress takes up the farm bill on a regular basis, the laws that were passed in 1938 and 1949 are suspended. And then those changes right atop what's going on in the farm bill or for farm policy in the next 5 years. If a farm bill isn't enacted and doesn't suspend permanent law, we revert back to what was there in 1938 and 1949, which is very out of date with today's agriculture and would really wreak havoc upon the agriculture economy. So we'll talk about permanent law and how it needs to be suspended, and that means the 1938 and 1949 bills. So there's a deep dive on Farm Bill permanent law history. Now we'll talk about who's involved with the Farm Bill. And the moral of the story here with these images is that Congress is narrowly divided right now. The Senate, 53-47. Republicans have the majority there. So it's a pretty narrow margin in the Senate, and it's an even narrower margin in the House. 219 to 213, Republicans have control. And during the last several months, that razor thin margin for Republicans has been on display frequently, and especially when it related to the reconciliation bill or the big package of legislation that passed over the summer that contained some changes to the farm safety net. There were some really close votes there. Historically, when you're in a spot where you've got a very close House and Senate, this is a time where bipartisanship might come into play, where especially for agriculture issues, which typically aren't necessarily a party divide, but are more geographic or regional or crop by crop or attitude about farms. That's where the differences might be. There might be some cross-party, across the aisle togetherness. We've not seen that much at all in 2025. Probably speaks more to the overall tenor of our politics these days than about agriculture, but it's something that we have to work with and be very, very mindful of. Of course, everybody in Congress has a say on a farm bill because they're voting on it, but the people that really have a say are those who are members of the agriculture committees. And you can see where those are split up around the country. Right now, in the House Agriculture Committee, North Dakota doesn't have a direct member on there. Congresswoman Fedorchuk's not on the Ag Committee, but certainly is in touch with those who are and works closely with many of her colleagues who are on the Agriculture Committee. But you can see kind of the geographic distribution of where these members are from and who they're representing. Similarly, in the Senate, uh, there's a heavy emphasis on the Midwest. Senator Hoeven is a member of the Senate Agriculture Committee, and three states actually have both of their members of the Senate are on the Agriculture Committee. That's Minnesota, Iowa, and Kansas. So the members of the Ag Committee have a lot to say about farm policy, but the people who have the most say about farm policy, I would contend, are the chairman and the ranking members of those committees. So the top Republican and the top Democrat on the House and Senate Agriculture committees, we call them the four corners, or sometimes the big four, because they are the bosses of the committees and they are kind of the chief negotiators when it comes to getting farm policy done. So in this Congress, the 119th Congress, Senator John Boozman of Arkansas is the chairman, the top Republican on the Senate Agriculture Committee, and the top Democrat is Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. Uh, Senator Klobuchar this is her first term as the ranking member on the Ag Committee, and this is also the first time that Senator Bozeman has been chairman. He was the top Republican of the committee previously, but when Republicans took control of the Senate, he ascended to that spot. Meanwhile, on the House side, Congressman G.T. Thompson has been chairman for one Congress before this, and he continues in his role. He's from north central Pennsylvania and very rural district, a lot of dairy, forestry, but he's been doing a lot of work as chairman to work with all of his members of the House Agriculture Committee Republican Caucus. So he's got a lot of influence and ties around the country. And then in her first term as ranking member of the Ag Committee, we've got Congresswoman Angie Craig from Minnesota. She's from just south of the Twin Cities, some of the exurbs of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area and some of the rural areas in southern Minnesota there are all part of her district. So those four are the big four. They have the most influence on Farm Bill policy and have been working over the last several months and really years before that to make sure that the issues surrounding agriculture and the Farm Bill are being considered and addressed. There's been a series of hearings over the last few years as the Farm Bills come due, and there have been markups on Farm Bill policy back in 2024. And then to an extent, there were some markups during the reconciliation bill process. We'll talk more about that. So I keep saying the reconciliation bill, but this is a piece of legislation that's got many names. This is the legislation that moved through Congress through the spring and midsummer this year. It's also been known as H.R. 1 or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Some call it OBBBA or OB3A. I thought that was pretty good. I call it the reconciliation bill, just for simplicity's sake. And really, technically, now that it's passed into law, it's Public Law 11921. But that bill wended its way through Congress again, starting in the spring and was signed into law on the 4th of July by President Trump. The bill is a reconciliation bill, meaning it's focused solely on budgetary issues. There's some asterisks attached to that, I guess, but it's a budget bill. And using rules in the Senate in particular, instead of having to get through a process where it needs to clear 60 votes in favor, as the Senate often has, the reconciliation bill process means it only needs 50 plus one or a simple majority of senators to vote for it. And in a time when you've got or really most times when the Senate is, not more than 60-40 divided and is a little tighter than that, it allows the majority party to move legislation related to budgets and spending on a narrower margin than usual. So that came out and worked through Congress the beginning parts of this year. Was known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I'll keep calling it the Reconciliation Bill just for simplicity's sake here. But that's why it came through and passed in a simple majority back in the summertime. Uh, because it's a budgetary bill, it wasn't able to include all Farm Bill policy that we would normally see in a full Farm Bill. Only parts of it move forward because the Farm Bill certainly has big budgetary impacts. It's about a 1.4, $1.5 trillion bill over 10 years. But not all of that is related to spending, so to speak. There's a lot of policy changes in there that don't constitute major changes in spending, whether more or less. And that's why only parts of the Farm Bill were included. There are also political concerns and realities for that too, but the Senate parliamentarian and ruled that many of those changes that would otherwise be in a full Farm Bill won't hack it in a reconciliation bill because of budgetary rules. So what is in the OBBA or the reconciliation bill for agriculture? Big changes and improvements to the farm safety net, additional support for biofuels. There were some significant dollars that were dedicated to conservation programs and some major agricultural tax provisions. And I know that one of the upcoming webinars hosted by NDFU will focus on the ag tax provisions and what those changes were. And the expert speakers there can address those impacts on farmers and ranchers far better than I can. And they were significant, though. But there were also some other changes to the Farm Bill programs that weren't necessarily so great. I'll talk about those in a moment. But for the farm safety net, there were some significant changes, some longtime priorities of Farmers Union and other groups that were addressed. So a few of those are on dual ARC PLC enrollment for 2025. That was an issue that National Farmers Union has pushed for and really was identified by North Dakota Farmers Union a few years ago and brought forward in the National Farmers Union policy process, where instead of having to guess between ARC and PLC about which would provide a better safety net for a farm in a given year, uh, there we think that it should just be you're in the program and whichever one triggers is the program assistance that you'll receive. Uh, that was included for 2025, probably in part because, we're halfway through the crop year already or beyond that. And it was just easier to allow that to happen. But hopefully that continues in future farm bills and as the programs continue on, that dual enrollment or the higher of, however you want to call it, continues to be the case. Another big improvement was the addition of up to 30 million new base acres for program eligibility. Uh, of course, farm programs, ARC and PLC in particular, are based on historical plantings or base acres. And if land doesn't have base, it isn't eligible for those programs. So by adding 30 million acres, which based on some cost containment provisions in the bill, it might not actually end up being 30 million, but the there's a formula in place that would allow for more base to come into the program. I'm from Wisconsin, from the northeast part of the state where there's a lot of dairy. Haven't typically been enrolled in programs, or weren't. There might be some new land that came into production that historically in the 80s or wherever the base period is wasn't being used. So there, a lot of my neighbors don't have base. This would be a way for them to be eligible for the program. I think that's the case for others around the country too. There were some increases to marketing loan rates, the programs that allow for greater financial flexibility and backing for commodity and row crop producers. So those were a long time in coming. There had only been small adjustments to those in the 2018 Farm Bill. They were further adjusted here. There were some adjustments and increases to payment limits, where there's a higher level of total amount of support per individual can be received for the each one of the farm programs coming into this farm bill cycle or the reconciliation bill. You could only receive $125,000 per year per individual for farm programs. That has now been raised to $155,000 a year per individual. So there's some updates there. Some dairy programs that I could get into deeper interests or deeper numbers there, but the dairy margin coverage program, the base or cap on how much production can be covered by DMC was raised to 6 million pounds from 5 million pounds of milk. So there's some changes there. Crop insurance premium subsidies went up a little bit along with higher coverage levels for certain types of crop insurance. It also eliminated the prohibition on using SCO and ARC or in PLC. So there were some changes there. And then perhaps the biggest change of all on the farm safety net relates to reference prices. And this was a big part of what Farmers Union and many other organizations called for. I've got a few selected commodities on screen here, where under the 2018 Farm Bill, the statutory reference price for wheat, for instance, was 550. That's been raised now by 13% to 635. And similar changes across the board, ranging from 9 to about 18% for each commodity, were out there. This is to better reflect costs of production, to better reflect where there's a need for a safety net that's more responsive to lower prices that affect family farmers and ranchers, particularly in high input cost periods like we're in now. But I also would contend that this is just the start and that there's plenty of other farm policy changes that need to take place. That said, this is now the law of the land. These are the new reference prices, along with those other provisions. And that's all because of the reconciliation bill that was signed into law on the 4th of July. These are changes that will be implemented by USDA and the Farm Service Agency in particular. I should note, the Farm Service Agency and USDA writ large is a big part of the farm safety net, in not just in the sense that they are administering those programs, but that's a big deal. That's a big reason and how these assistance programs get out there. And not through the reconciliation bill, but through some administrative actions earlier this year, there's been a huge attrition and reduction in force for the USDA. About 20% of the USDA workforce is not there. That was there at the beginning of this year. A lot of that is due to uh, the option for employees to depart. There's a lot of other reductions in force across the federal government as part of the DOGE effort. And as a result of many of these changes and expected changes, USDA is down 20% in staffing than it was at the beginning of the year. So how that will affect program implementation and how the Farm Service Agency will be able to implement many of these changes, which they're doing right now, remains to be seen. But it's something that we need to keep a very, very, very close eye on. And especially as there might be more changes to how USDA does business as part of a planned reorganization that USDA has floated in the last couple of months. So something we're keeping a close eye on because the Farm Service Agency is part of the farm safety net, and we need to make sure it works well for farmers and ranchers. But I mentioned some of those, the farm safety net improvements in some more detail there, but we've got some other changes that were part of the reconciliation bill. In order to pay for these improvements to the farm safety net and boosted support for biofuels and the tax provisions and things like that, there were some cuts and reductions in spending to other farm bill programs, in particular, the nutrition program or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The reduction in spending, I put it that way because the federal government's share of how much they're going to pay for SNAP programs went down by about, I think, $186 billion. That cost of those dollars that would have otherwise been spent by the federal government is being passed on to the states to pick up. And while that may not result in a cut in SNAP assistance to farmer or to eligible SNAP recipients, it certainly calls into question where those dollars will be coming from and might in fact result in lower benefits. So there is some deep concerns about that. Farmers Union raised some concerns. Certainly, many other nutrition advocates and organizations out there that historically have been part of the Farm Bill coalition backed away from Farm Bill advocacy as part of the reconciliation bill because of these huge cuts or reductions in spending to SNAP. There were also some significant concerns with the reconciliation bill about how changes to Medicaid will affect farmers and ranchers and people in rural communities as we expect and experts project that there will be a reduction in health insurance coverage and millions of people will be off their health care or health insurance coverage as a result of changes in the reconciliation bill. And we know that's a big deal for rural America and especially where we have limited options and access to healthcare providers. So these were some of the trade-offs that were addressed and brought forward in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for the Reconciliation Bill. So, as I said, the Farm Bill provisions that were part of the reconciliation bill were just a part of what is typically in a farm bill. There's still other business that needs to be taken care of. I talked earlier about the need to suspend permanent law. That was not part of the farm bill process or the farm bill provisions that were part of the reconciliation bill. So if Congress takes no action between now and September 30th, which is likely on the farm bill at least, these permanent law provisions will start kicking back in. Now, that doesn't really have an effect until the beginning of 2026, just on how things work with those programs. But Congress really needs to do something at the very least to suspend permanent law by early 2026. There's also other programs that ought to be reauthorized, and if they aren't, will have a significant impact on rural communities and farmers. The Conservation Reserve Program, for instance, needs to be reauthorized. This is typically a formality, similar to how the permanent law provisions are. But if that isn't reauthorized, there's going to start to be an attrition in the program, the Conservation Reserve Program, and how that helps farmers and landowners conserve natural resources in their land. So that needs to be reauthorized. Other conservation programs out there that, in fact, were helped by parts of the reconciliation bill, they also need to be reauthorized. Rural development programs, a lot of the lending programs that help rural communities, those are on the hook if they aren't reauthorized here in the next few months. And also some of the nutrition programs out there need to be addressed as well. So those are a few of the things that must happen on the Farm Bill. I would say there's also a few other things that should happen on the Farm Bill between now and the beginning of 2026. In fact, National Farmers Union just had a fly-in here to DC that talked about, amongst other issues, our priorities for a Farm Bill 2.0. Some have called it the Skinny Farm Bill or Farm Bill Redux. Call it what you will. I'm going to call it the Farm Bill 2.0, as that's what Chairman Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania, of the House Ag Committee, has been referring to it. One of the priorities that Farmers Union members brought forward was the need to take a deeper look at how we structure farm safety net programs. ARC and PLC are a valuable part of our risk management efforts and make sure that, when there are losses, we've got some programs in place to help out. But are they addressing the longer term risks that farmers face as a result of low prices or higher input costs? Uh, Maybe we need to think bigger than ARC PLC, and that's some of our priorities here as we talk about Farm Bill 2.0. We want to make sure that ARC PLC dual enrollment, as is currently the law of the land, at least for 2025, is extended year after year. Shouldn't be a guessing game. Let's make sure that the farm safety net is strong for farmers every year. Kind of getting to the issue of rethinking our farm safety net and making sure it addresses the bigger issues of supply and demand. Maybe there ought to be a voluntary soil health and markets program that provides some incentives for farmers to keep some of their most vulnerable land out of production for a year at a time on a voluntary basis in exchange for some boost to the farm safety net for their other acres. And that could be part of that safety valve that helps in times of low prices. We want to make sure that there's better disaster support out there. We know year in and year out, there are losses that occur because of natural disasters or economic downturns. USDA shouldn't be caught flat-footed. We should have some programs in place ready to roll when that happens, and the Farm Bill gives us a good opportunity for that. Also, the current trade situation we're in right now and the overall downturn in the farm economy brings some particularly important emphasis on that, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. And one other thing that really could be helpful on a farm balance sheet basis is having more local and regional food procurement options out there. There are many headlines and stories written about the end of the local food procurement agreements or LFPA program, also local food for schools programs that were run by USDA until early this year. And those were rather uh, unceremoniously dropped earlier this year, where a lot of farmers had found some connections with local institutions, schools, keeping a lot of the food dollars local. Uh, there's a real interest, bipartisan interest on this, that Farmers Union has been leading to build more support for that. So this is kind of a no-brainer. It shows up in the MAHA report. It's talked about by local food advocates and school proponents. It's got Republican and Democratic support across the country. We really need to get that done. And as we're working on a farm bill, this is a chance to address some of the market inequalities out there that have plagued agriculture for a long time. These are fairness for farmers provisions out there. We need to have mandatory country of origin labeling, especially as we're talking about America First trade policy. We need to make sure we know where our beef is coming from, and passing the American Beef Labeling Act would be part of that. We've got to make sure farmers and ranchers have equal footing or a fair shake to succeed in the face of highly consolidated meatpacking and processing markets. So that's why we need better enforcement of the Packers and Stockyards Act. As we're entering a time of uh, more consolidation as well in the farm equipment and machinery world, we need to make sure there's farmers have the right to repair their own equipment. And we've also got to be mindful of the tough farm economy and the stress that that puts on our farm families. And we need to put more funding towards the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network, which many farmers union leaders have championed for years. So these are a few of those Farm Bill 2.0 priorities that should be part of another piece of legislation out there when that starts moving. Also on those priorities, if you want to take action and let your members of Congress know, and also to be signed up for additional action alerts on how to speak up and make your voice heard, either as a Union member or friend, you can follow this QR code. And I think later on we can probably put a link in the chat to fill out the action alert that we were using just last week during the Farmers Union fly-in here in Washington to make sure that you've got your voice heard. So we'll put that back on screen or on the chat a little bit later. So what happens next, though? So I mentioned permanent law starts kicking in really, or the Farm Bill expires on September 30th. I don't see many pathways to Congress actually taking action on that in the next 2 weeks. That said, the impacts of permanent law don't really start until early 2026. But there's also a few other considerations out there. With the downturn in the farm economy and the increasing pressure that political leaders are feeling because of these tough economic conditions, a lot of that, again, is due to the influence of corporate monopolies on our input costs or long-term damage to our trading relationships because of retaliatory tariffs that are out there. And the tariff and trade policy regime we've been following over the last several months has really impacted our ability to export commodities. Should there be another trade assistance package similar to what President Trump enacted in his first term, the Market Facilitation Program, or if it's going to be a congressionally mandated or funded program similar to a disaster program, it's unclear which is going to carry the day right now, and if it's going to be one or the other. Congressional leaders and the administration are still talking about that. It's clear that some sort of assistance needs to happen. If that were going to move forward, having it attached to a Farm Bill 2.0 stands to reason because it would make sure that these other important farm policy priorities are addressed and not just a band-aid, a very important band-aid that would be attached with some sort of assistance package. So we need to keep that in mind. Another aspect that comes into play here is the possibility of a federal government shutdown. Uh, I mentioned the Farm Bill expires on September 30th, but really, most federal programs, their spending, their appropriations package comes due on September 30th. And leaders in the House and Senate on the Republican and Democratic side are negotiating, I hope are negotiating, on whether or not to keep the federal government open after September 30th. There may be some stopgap measures that pass here in the next couple of weeks to get past September 30th. But if Congress is going to continue to play chicken with the possibility of a federal government shutdown, that's going to impact the ability for Congress and agencies to do their work, either on setting up trade assistance packages or to negotiate on getting a Farm Bill 2.0 done. It could use up some of the more of the oxygen, which is already in pretty short supply on Capitol Hill. So if the federal government shutdown game continues for a while, that's going to make it harder to get a Farm Bill 2.0 done. And if that's the case, we're probably looking at the possibility of an extension by the end of the Farm Bill by the end of this year. Last year, a similar scenario played out. There had been real movement on farm bills, at least on the House side, during spring of 2024. In fact, the House Agriculture Committee marked up and passed a bill that had some Democratic support in addition to all Republicans supporting it out of the House Agriculture Committee. But it didn't really go much further than that. The Senate didn't take much action, and the House floor never moved forward on it and it really stalled out until after the election and into the lame duck session back in 2024. Farmers Union played an instrumental role in making sure that even though the Farm Bill didn't get done in 2024, there was very important disaster assistance moved forward. And it had to overcome some significant roadblocks from congressional leadership, like at the highest levels in both the House and the Senate. Uh, that was overcome, and $30 billion in assistance to farmers was delivered and is continuing to be delivered by USDA during the legislative action in late 2024. We might find ourselves in a similar situation where a farm bill extension is on the table along with some trade assistance or some sort of disaster package. That's something to keep an eye out for. But that would represent another missed opportunity by Congress to get important farm legislation done. Many of those priorities I talked about that should happen have been on the table for years since the 2018 Farm Bill, and we just need Congress to take leadership to take action on that and get some of those very bipartisan, very broadly supported bills and move them forward to have a better farm safety net and a stronger program available for farmers. So those are a few things to watch for in the rest of 2025. I really look forward to hearing some questions and taking some questions or any feedback you might have on how Farmers Union is approaching, National Farmers Union is approaching the Farm Bill process, how North Dakota Farmers Union is working on it. I know we've got some experts on the issues here on the call with us today, and I hope you can fill me in on stuff I got wrong or things I ought to be looking for. But I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and hope that we can have a good dialogue here. But thanks again for the opportunity.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into either the chat or in the Q&A. Mike, what is the likelihood of getting some form of bridge funding by the end of the year?
Yeah, I think it's a strong possibility, but it is unclear how that's going to happen yet. And I think, in fact, there were probably 4 or 5 stories about that today and yesterday in some of the Washington newsletters and in farm publications as well. I think it's likely to happen, but there's a lot of questions about who's going to lead it, how is it going to be administered, does the program, is it based on trade issues? Is it based on the economic activity or economic situation in general? So I think something will get done, but the question is how strong will it be? Not just in like how many dollars are in it, but how forward thinking and comprehensive it could be. Because when there's we know that that farm economic problems aren't just like a one-off. They keep happening, and we've got to have some broader provisions tacked to it to make sure that we're taking preventative steps from future issues of coming up, whether that's on trade problems, whether that's on uh, market consolidation and monopolies, or on just oversupply issues. We've got to be thinking about that in broader terms, not just about aid. But I do think it will happen this year.
Mike? So obviously trade is really a big issue on a lot of people's mind right now. Will trade prohibition be enhanced in the possibility of a future farm bill title?
Yeah, that's another area that could stand to a lot from a lot of benefit in a Farm Bill 2.0 is to fund some of those trade promotion packages that are part of the trade title of the Farm Bill, like the uh, historically farm bills have included tens of millions of dollars to help commodity organizations or those representing commodity organizations to build stronger trading relationships and partnerships with our foreign uh, trading partners. And a lot of that has helped build markets that we have benefited from by shipping soybeans around the world, for instance. But the tariff policies in the last several months and back in 2017, 18, and 19 also did some severe damage. And we haven't really recovered, I would argue, from that. It's unclear how much, you put some more dollars into those trade promotion programs. Will it rebuild us or do much rebuilding in the face of big tariffs and the trade provocations we've got going on out there? It's hard to tell. But if our trade policy settles down a bit and we've got more dollars into trade promotion, it certainly could help. But there's still a lot of ripples out there in the trade world.
Mike. So one last question. So you talked a lot about different things happening and the possibility. Is there some emerging egg issues that you didn't address that maybe we should be aware of or be thinking about in the near future?
Yeah. Well, a couple things on the very near future. I mean, we're in the pocket of time here, I think, where uh, if there's any sort of major disasters in 2025 yet to come, that could trigger more of a political response to provide some assistance based on that disaster, and it might do more to push things across. That's one thing I've seen over the last, during my time in Washington, is that when there is a big disaster that opens more eyes and makes Congress act faster. Now, we might already be in that disaster right now, being the current economic downturn. So that we might already be there, but just keeping that in mind. Another emerging issue, though, is on how how Congress wants to or can address some of these consistent downturns in price that we keep seeing for commodities. And if there's going to be more interest in how do we, get out ahead of that rather than just providing backfill, so to speak, when the prices are down and we've got to provide assistance, how do we keep the prices from going down in the first place? And I think there's growing interest in that around Washington. And I think that's something that might be more on the table here in coming weeks and, well, coming months and years. Not so much the weeks, I guess.
Well, thanks, Mike. That looks like the end of our questions. Again, thank you for sharing your knowledge and taking the time. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Mike. I will be sharing the presentation with you all by email and also his contact information and the recording to this video. Again, you can also go onto YouTube and search for any previous NDFU webinars. With that, please be on the lookout for our next webinar, which is always the third Thursday of the month, which will be October 18th, Estate Planning and Transitioning. And then our other one will be November 20th, the talking about the Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBA. We'll really be talking about the tax changes that were impacted with the OBA. So again, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you, Mike, for presenting today. And we wish everybody a good day. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.